Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, earlier we heard a pretty stinging broadside from Sir John Major against the leaders of the Leave campaign, and surely not one that Boris Johnson can dismiss. He's with me now. Good morning. Boris Johnson,
Andrew.
Dismiss it.
Well, I do dismiss it in a way, because I think that we've got a very short time now to go until this referendum, and I think what people want to hear are the arguments. And what we're setting out on the Leave side of the campaign is, I think, an agenda for the government to take back control on June the 23rd of a lot of things that really matter to the people of this country. So yes, there's the money, and not an insignificant sum. Yes, there's our borders, but there's also very, very important aspects of our economic life that invisibly we can no longer control. And we want to take them back, and we think it would be great for our country and great for democracy.
Well, I want to get into the details of all of those things later on, if I may, but nonetheless, Sir John, following Chris Patten, following Michael Heseltine and others, they've all had a really, really personal go at you. Is this because they're trying to take you out?
Whether it is or not, I think that I'm rather with John McDonnell this morning, who says,
Really?
yeah, well, he says,
Unlikely.
he says that there's too much of this sort of blue-on-blue action, and what he wants to hear is the arguments, and that's where I am. If we take back control, let's go into the money side of it. If we take back control of that money, we talked about the 350 million. You heard earlier on how that 350 million figure is fictitious.
Squalid.
Actually, it's squalid or whatever.
Yeah.
Not true. Look at it. Imagine I give you I take out my wallet, which I don't actually happen to have on me, unfortunately, but I gave you, if I had £350,
And
I gave you £350.
Yes, and I give you back
80,
and then I give you back another 20.
Next year, you gave me back 60 or so. Then you decided that you were going to spend some of it
on your behalf.
On my behalf. Thank you
Get
very
your
much.
haircut.
On whatever priorities you chose. They might not be my priorities. You decided you were going to spend it on what you thought were good things for me, and then you gave about half of it away, and we never saw it ever again.
But
I think most reasonable
people,
people,
£350.
most people would say, and they'd be absolutely right, that we had lost control of that 350 million. And it's totally wrong.
You get a lot back in your pocket. You get a lot back in your pocket, just as farmers do, just as universities do. Lots of organisations in this country, that money comes back to them.
And the point that we're making is that we would have
is that Westminster should stop that, being able to stop that happening.
We'd have a lot more back, £10.6 billion a year net back, and all we're suggesting, humbly and respectfully, to the government is that, yes, they could spend that on one nation policies for the good of this country, such as on the National Health Service, for instance, such as on cutting VAT on the cost of fuel for elderly people, which is a huge burden, and which we currently cannot do because of our membership of the EU. Invisibly, many aspects of our life are now controlled from the EU, from abroad, from Brussels, in a way that I think is anti-democratic. At the heart of this campaign, coming to the second big charge against us, which is that we're talking too much about immigration and all that, for me, this is a question of democracy. It's about public consent and explaining to people. And the moment we have absolutely no power to control our immigration policy.
OK, so very quick-fire question in that case. Do you want to see immigration come down in this country?
I think I would like a situation where the government was able to fulfil its pledges to the people. And if it is going to say that immigration is going to come down to the tens of net immigration from the EU, is going to come down to the tens of thousands, then it should be in a legal position to deliver that. At the moment, we are
not quite the question I asked.
And
said,
the answer is yes, by the way.
You do?
Yes.
OK,
yes,
you want to see immigration
yes,
come down.
and I do.
Okay.
I'll tell you why. Because I think that if you look at the figures last week, we had a net increase of 330,000 all told, 333,000, 270,000 from the EU, 184,000 net, a city the size of Oxford from the EU. Now, the question the Remain campaign have to answer is, what is their long-term vision? What is their programme for the country if the numbers continue at this rate? Because at the moment, if we grow the size of a city like Newcastle every year, we will see our population rise inexorably to about 70 or perhaps 80 million. Now, what the Remain campaign have to say is, What's their vision for this? Where are they going to... it may be a great vision for Britain, by the way. It may be a positive thing. But where are they going to build the homes? What's going to happen to the green belt? How will it work for schools and hospitals and all the public services that will be affected? We're not hearing anything. We're not hearing any description of how this is supposed to work in the absence of control. What we're saying is that on day one, post-June the 23rd, you take back control of that, but you'd also take back control of loads of the management of our economy and our politics.
Let me move on to something else. Last time we were discussing, we had a bit of a round of disagreement about the single market. I had Michael Gove in that chair, and I said, after Brexit, will we be in the European single market, yes or no? And he said, no.
And he was right.
So we won't be in the European single market.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me explain. I remember you and I, we both covered the dawn of the single market. We remember what it was all about, the great joyous moment of 1992.
Actually.
Yes. And one of the stunning things about it is that in the 20 years since the creation of the 1992 single market, actually, there were 27 other countries not in the EU who have done better than the UK at exporting into the single market goods, and I think 21 countries who've done better at exporting services, in which we excel into the single market. Now, you have to ask yourself why that is so. And I think one of the reasons is that this country is, yes, we're members of the single market, but we're also caught in the toils of regulation coming at a rate of 2,500 a year from the EU that costs our businesses about £600 million per week. I think it's the whole programme is one of the factors that is making the European Union the slowest growing continent on Earth, apart from Antarctica.
I saw
our messages are getting through.
I saw the quote. But the single market, you said leaving the single market would cause business uncertainty, and you've used the image of the Nike swoop. So you do.
Well, I haven't actually used that image, but what I certainly accept is that I think a hockey stick might be a good...
right, a hockey stick. So it's a bigger thing, but it still goes down first.
No, I think if you study a hockey stick closely, you'll see it doesn't go down. It just goes up. Anyway, the people that I'm inclined to credit on this...
After Brexit, after leaving the single currency, there would be a bit of a downward shock. No. You can call it a blip, you can call it a shock. We could discuss how long it is, how big it is, but we would go down a bit. I
think it's very telling that you used the word single currency there just now, Andrew, because actually we didn't join the single currency.
Sorry,
and a lot of people prophesied doom if we did, and actually the British economy powered on, and it was the Eurozone.
I said
it was the Eurozone that suffered. And that goes to the heart of, I think, the current protestations and prognostications of gloom. They were wrong then, and they're wrong now. So the two authorities that I'm inclined to listen to on this are the head of the Remain campaign, Lord Rose of Marks and Spencer, who went before the Treasury's Select Committee, if you remember, and was very, very clear. He said there would be no shock. What would happen, and there was one economic prediction
he made. He didn't say jobs would go down.
He said that wages for the low-paid would go up. And that, for my money, is a good idea. Because if you look at what's happening in our country at the moment...
I understand that argument.
Well, I don't think people are aware quite of the differentials that are now opening up between the pay of the FTSE 100 chiefs who are parading through Downing Street and urging us all to remain in the EU, and the people in the average pay of people in their companies. So I think he was right about that. The second authority is the Prime Minister, who was in this, I think, probably in this chair.
But you don't trust him.
And he said to you...
You say he's untrustworthy.
He said to you...
You say he's dodgy Dave. He's untrustworthy.
You're putting words into my mouth, I'm afraid. What he said to you then, and these words I certainly am inclined to credit, he said to you then that a lot of people would scaremonger, and there'll be all sorts of talk about how Britain couldn't manage on its own, but actually, he said that Britain could prosper outside the EU.
But we'd be better in, of course,
and that there would be no difficulty doing free trade deals. And one of the things that we're saying today is actually you'd be able to do free trade deals according to the European Commission's own statistics, not fantasy. According to the European Commission's own statistics, you'd be able to do free trade deals that would generate 300,000 jobs.
We've been talking about the Prime Minister. Let me show you this. That's one of your campaigns. You can't trust David Cameron on immigration, and you've put out other things saying you can't trust David Cameron on Turkey.
That is the first time I've seen that, and my view is that
you disavow it.
It's the first time I've seen it, and I certainly think that...
How do you feel about it?
I think, well, I would put it in my own language, okay? And my own language would be that. By the way, I backed David Cameron in 2005 because he's the best man for the job. He's the best man for the job now. But what I think is certainly true is that if you tell people that you can cut immigration to the tens of thousands, and we all stand on that manifesto.
Corrosive of public trust was your phrase.
That's exactly what I'm going to say. If you then are unable legally to deliver what you have pledged because of our membership of the EU, I think it is frustrating, and I think people want an answer.
But also untrustworthy.
So what we want to hear, I think, well, we're all convicted of the same crime by that token, because all of us Conservatives stood on that manifesto. We all thought that we were going to get reform of the EU as a result of the renegotiation to adjust our immigration policy so that we would be able to cope with that. We didn't get a sausage. We didn't get anything in that renegotiation. We weren't able to change our migration.
Right.
And the result, what I really want to hear from the Remain campaign is how they see this thing going. Because contrary to what we've been hearing just now, the Eurozone is still mired in catastrophic unemployment.
It's getting better.
51% youth unemployment in Greece. Are you saying that's getting better?
No, but Spain is improving.
45% youth unemployment in Spain.
Yes, it's terrible, but
it is
it's
an
improving.
abomination.
It's improving. And their case is that eventually they will get out of that, and therefore the migratory pressure on our shores will ease.
Well, we've seen no sign of it over the last 10 years or over the last 20 years. We've seen a steady increase in migratory pressure. And what is going to happen, unquestionably, is that if conceptually, Andrew, you remember this from when we first covered this, the ideology of the EU is to think of the difference between the furthest reaches of the Balkans and Iberia and Italy as being no different from Britain,
because they're trying to create a single
no different
market.
from Britain than say Surrey and Lancashire, right? It's all one territory throughout which they want people to circulate totally freely.
But since we're talking
I don't
big
think
picture,
that's feasible. I don't think that's feasible in circumstances where you've got real economic crisis caused by the euro and massive migratory flows across Europe.
I said I wouldn't interrupt.
Sorry.
You said you wouldn't give me speeches.
Sorry.
We're veering towards that.
Sorry, forgive me.
In terms of the big picture, isn't it pretty abominable to compare what the EU as it is today with Hitler? And don't you regret that?
Look,
Hitler believed in strong nation states fighting each other, which has been a long European tradition going right back to Gustavus Adolphus and all the rest of it. It's what the Europeans did, and we were drawn in again and again and again. And the EU was set up to stop that happening. And we have both lived through a period of peace, which the EU has to be given some credit for.
Of course. And I don't write the headlines. And the key point I would make is that there is something worryingly anti-democratic about the EU as it currently set up. I do think that it should concern everybody in this country that 60% of our laws now come from Brussels, primary legislation and secondary legislation together in. I think it should concern everybody that since the Lisbon Treaty, we have been outvoted more and more often. And there are fundamental ways now in which we cannot control our lives. I've mentioned the money. I've mentioned immigration
let's
policy.
talk about immigration.
Look at VAT,
which we haven't done properly. We haven't done. Can I just show you this poster again? I'm sorry, I'm showing you Vote Leave posters all the time now. Turkey is joining the EU. Is that true?
That is the government's policy.
The government would like it to at some point in the future, maybe. Other people, but it's not. The statement "Turkey is joining the EU" is not true.
Turkey has been joining the EU since 1963.
Well, you join or you don't join, but it's not true, is it? That is just that's what John Major was talking about.
Frankly, I don't mind whether Turkey joins the EU, provided the UK leaves the EU. I mean, that's where I am on this matter. But look, I'm very pro-Turk, and I'm very proud of my.
And you wanted Turkey to leave the EU.
I'm very proud of my Turkish ancestry, my Turkish family.
And you always wanted Turkey to join the EU for big historical reasons.
Yeah.
End that great gap between the Eastern and Western Roman empires and all of that.
I think you've shown that on your. But that was, you've got to understand, Andrew, that was back in the days when some of us, and perhaps John Major himself, thought that widening the EU would not mean this federalising, centralising, deepening process that we've seen. Right. The really disappointing thing was the Lisbon Treaty, which I think...
Let's not talk about the Lisbon Treaty just now.
Why not?
Well, because I'm trying to talk about Turkey.
No, because I think that the EU has changed out of all recognition since people like me first started advocating Turkish
Okay,
membership.
well, let's not talk about back in the day. Let's talk about 2 months ago when you said there was no prospect really of Turkey joining the EU. You said it was between 0 and 20% or less than that. No prospect, not on the cards at all. And now you're responsible for this post that goes up saying Turkey is joining the EU. That is a flat lie.
It is the government's policy that Turkey should join the EU.
That's a different poster.
It's something that they've said is they've simultaneously said it's their number one priority.
That's a very different poster.
And they're going to pave the way between Brussels and Ankara. And they're also saying that it won't be achieved till the year 3000. So they can't be.
It is hogwash, isn't it? It's an inverted column of piffle, or whatever the phrase is.
I believe it's government policy. If that means it's hogwash.
If the poster said it is government policy that Turkey at some stage should join the EU, that would be true. Turkey is joining the EU is not true.
No, actually, it's government policy that Turkish membership of the EU should be accelerated.
Well, at some point in the future. They've got lots of hurdles.
No, I'm sorry. It's government policy that Turkish membership of the EU should be speeded up. And there are clips of the Prime Minister in Ankara advocating the speeding up of this.
In the heat of this campaign, you have all gone, and you particularly, you've gone a bit wild. That's not true, that poster. And you've said things, you've got the 350 million and all the rest of it, which are not the case.
No, I think actually...
I mean, both sides are doing this. Both sides are what Faisal Islam called post-truth politics.
No, well, I wonder whether you were going to say that. I don't think... I think the 350 million genuinely is a reasonable figure to use for the reasons I've explained. If I give you £350 and then you spend something on my family and you give me a bit back...
But the ONS...
This is money we cannot control.
All right, okay.
And a lot of it, frankly, you've written, and you spend some of my money on supporting Iberian bullfighting, which is not what I want you to do.
Looking from outside, this seems that the Conservative family is terminally falling apart. People are saying that you're saying the Prime Minister is untrustworthy.
No.
Boris Johnson is saying you're a court jester, and so forth.
I think you're confusing me with John Major for some reason, which is the first time I've ever been confused with John Major.
That's most unlikely. But can this party be put together again? And how do you respond to John Major's suggestion that you were doing this really for personal ambition? You used to be in favour of joining the EU, and now you've decided this is your best way to Downing Street.
No, nonsense, absolute nonsense. I think that obviously there is going to be a temptation by one side or other, and particularly the Remain side, to try to turn it into a personality-driven conversation. My view about the EU has changed, but that is because the EU has changed out of all recognition. And it is now totally different from what we signed up to in 1972, and it is turning into a federal who say we will be safer, taking back control and voting leave on.
One last interruption, Boris Johnson. Thank you very much. We have run out of time. Thank you very much indeed. And now